Excellencies, members of diplomatic missions, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies, let me welcome you to tonight's dinner to launch the Bernard Wheelahan Latin American Scholarship. This is a scholarship that's been generously endowed by Pacific Hydro Proprietary Limited to help fund the cost of students from the ANU undertaking the Bachelor of Latin American Studies to spend a semester of their degree studying at a university in Latin America. Let me explain a little about what the scholarship is doing and what we're attempting to do here at the ANU about Latin America, how the scholarship fits into that. This year we launched a new degree, the Bachelor of Latin American Studies, the first and the only one in Australia. What that degree represents is the commitment of our university to an exciting, important and seriously emerging part of the world. As part of that degree, students are required to spend one semester studying in Latin America, and from 2014, the endowment provided by Pacific Hydro will pay several students to help with the expenses of doing so. And this scholarship will operate in perpetuity. We hope, over time, that the fund will grow through more contributions such as those of Pacific Hydro, just as the teaching program on Latin America that we offer grows as well. As relationships between Latin America and Australia develop, so will interest. I spend a significant part of my life with young people studying various things in political science and international relations, and I can verify that, in fact, interest about Latin America amongst young Australians is already very high. What perhaps is not as high is the structure and the resources to allow that interest to develop further. While this university and my college in particular, my dean in particular, Professor Tony Mackay, has done more than anywhere else in the country to develop that, we need a great deal more to develop this field of study and of research to its full potential. And that's why this privately funded scholarship is important. Bernard Wheelahan has been and remains a major force behind the development of relations between Australia and Latin America. His long experience of the region and his efforts here in business and government to develop those relations have been second to none, and we are very proud to associate this scholarship with his name. I'd like to particularly acknowledge the presence here of the ambassadors of Latin America and the other diplomatic representatives of Latin America. The Dean of the Diplomatic Corps here in Canberra, His Excellency Pedro Villagra Delgado, said in my hearing recently that the Latin American ambassadors in Canberra operate like a gang. I can now tell you, now that he's gone, that our previous Vice-Chancellor described them as hunting in a pack. And I think he implied that he'd been hunted on more than one occasion. But whichever it is, I'm not sure which is more polite, they've been an enormous help to the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies and to me personally. They support dozens of events that we undertake, and they give up a lot of their own time to attend those events in person. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them once again. During the evening, we'll have a number of speakers, but first, I'd like to introduce, for perhaps a more formal welcome, Dr. Eric Lithander, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, the new Pro-Vice-Chancellor, International and Outreach. Dr. Lithander is quite new to the ANU, but he brings to us great potential for developing Latin American studies and links with Latin America. He grew up, in fact, in Latin America, in Brazil, Mexico and Argentina, and his PhD is on literature from Latin America. His job is enormous. He covers the world for the ANU, promoting it around the world and building relationships outside Australia for the ANU. And he's speaking tonight on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor. Please welcome Dr. Eric Lithander.
Buenas noches. Es para mí un verdadero honor y un muy gran placer darles la bienvenida a este evento. Eu também gostaria de oferecer as melhores boas-vindas aos nossos amigos brasileiros, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. It gives me particular pleasure on behalf of ANU to host this evening's event celebrating the Bernard Wheelahan Latin American Scholarships funded by Pacific Hydro. Experiencing Latin America firsthand, which is what these scholarships will help to support, is something that has had an absolutely formative influence in my own personal life. When I was growing up, I had the tremendous fortune of spending 15 years in Latin America, 6 years in Brazil, 5 years in Mexico, and 4 years in Argentina. And later, after completing my undergraduate studies, I did a master's in Latin American Studies at the University of Cambridge. And when I had finished with that, I still didn't have enough, so I did a PhD in the Spanish department in the University of Cambridge, focusing on the works of the Argentinian writer Julio Cortázar. You will be relieved to hear that I will save the detailed description of my thesis for another occasion. But you can imagine then that I'm a great supporter of Latin American Studies at ANU, and of the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies in particular, which, as you know, under the leadership of Dr. John Minns, the centre is the country's finest resource on Australia's engagement with Latin America, and of course provides the only undergraduate degree in Latin American Studies in Australia. In the context of this focus on Latin America, we're gathered tonight to celebrate the foresight, the vision, and the generosity of Pacific Hydro in supporting these scholarships to allow the students of the Bachelor's in Latin American Studies to spend part of their degree in Latin America. In my view, there are few better ways to promote the development of closer diplomatic, business, and cultural ties between countries than the mobility of young people. As Australia's leading university, the ANU views the opportunity to have an overseas experience during your degree as a critical element of a well-rounded degree. Our university strategic plan calls for 25% of all our students to have spent some time of their degree abroad by the year 2020. It's an ambitious target. And as you can imagine, being able to support students financially to get this overseas experience is extremely important. So we greatly thank Pacific Hydro, and in particular its CEO, Rob Grant, for making this terrific contribution. And it's particularly pleasing to see these new scholarships being awarded in honour of Bernard Wheelahan, who's been a long-time champion of strengthening the ties between Australia and Latin America. I think that the wonderful attendance at this event of the heads of mission of the Latin American countries is a testament to the high esteem in which Bernard and Pacific Hydro are held in the community. The close relationship which ANU maintains with the diplomatic corps is of particular a source of particular pride to the ANU, and in my new role I hope to further deepen these connections and relationships with the embassies. So allow me once again to thank Pacific Hydro for their tremendous generosity. I look forward to watching this scholarship program develop and flourish in the coming months and years, and I hope that I can count on your support to help making it a success. Thank you very much.
Let me now introduce Mr. Rob Grant, the CEO of Pacific Hydro. Rob is an important part of the reason why we're here tonight. Some time ago, I gave a presentation at the Australian Government's Council on Australia-Latin America Relations, COALA, of which Rob is a board member. And after that presentation, Rob followed me out of the room and suggested that Pacific Hydro might actually set up a scholarship of this kind in Bernard Wheelahan's name. I've heard Rob speak a number of times now, and each time it's impressed me that he's a person who looks to the future very much. I think it's indicated by the fact that he was chairman of the Clean Energy Council in Australia from 2008 through to 2011. Another is that he's chosen to focus his business efforts and in fact to make his base in Latin America itself, which many of us think is certainly a region of the future. But also investing in education is investing in the future, and this endowment, the Bernard Wheelahan Scholarship, is such an investment in the development of a cohort of students who will not only have familiarity with Latin America, but a deep knowledge that comes from study and from studying in the region itself. Please welcome Mr. Rob Grant.
Thank you, John. Your Excellencies, some ex-ambassadors here, to Bernard, to Helen, wonderful to see you again, and to friends. It's a great privilege to be able to be here tonight for the launch of Bernard the scholarship supported by Pacific Hydro. I've just come off QF 28 from Santiago. As John said, I'm based in Sao Paulo at the moment, so I left on Monday morning, and I've got a rule not to make any big decisions in the first 24 hours after landing. I think it probably goes the same for not making big speeches as well, so I'll keep this relatively short. Pacific Hydro this year is celebrating 20 years of clean energy. We're proudly born and bred in Melbourne. We were started in 1992, and in 2005, after being listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, we were taken over by Industry Funds Management, who represent about 5 million Australian workers. And since 2001, pretty much half of our history, we've been present in Latin America, initially through our investments in Chile, and then more recently since 2006 in Brazil. And we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to invest around $600 million of our shareholders' money, that's workers' superannuation, retirement savings, into Latin America. And we do that because we believe it's a great place to be investing in renewable energy, and it's a great place for the owners of Pacific Hydro, the retirees of the future, to be looking for a stable and positive return. We're also obviously very proud of our business here in Australia, and we would like to be doing much more here in Australia by way of renewable energy investment, but we believe it's a good hedge, if nothing else, to be having our business, so much of our business now based in Latin America. Bernard was our chairman from 2002 till 2011, 10, a good 7 years, just try, hence the 24-hour rule. And his contribution to the company, as I've said on a number of occasions, has really given us this opportunity to be where we are in Latin America. We were already in Chile by the time Bernard arrived, but to be able to sort of make the types of investments and the commitment to Latin America that we did was in large part due to his enthusiasm and his credibility to be able to tell the story about Latin America in a Melbourne boardroom. And I remember when we first went to South America, trying to convey an awareness and understanding of the opportunity there, as well as dispelling a lot of the very old myths about the risks of that part of the world. His experience initially out of working in Venezuela and then his time on Koala just gave our strategy a huge amount of credibility and support as well. We grew very quickly from 2 people to about 150 in Chile over the last 10 years, and Bernard has been a wonderful supporter of all of our team in Latin America just as much as he has in Australia. So when it came to his retirement, we thought, well, we could do the traditional thing and give him a set of golf clubs, or we could do something slightly more adventurous and creative. And he'd been talking about his burgeoning interest in the ANU's Latin America Studies course, and we have a history at Pacific Hydro of investing in the community through our Sustainable Communities Fund here in Australia and in Latin America, and this just seemed to be one more leg of that philosophy and that theme which fitted very well. As part of being on Koala, one of its mandates is to deepen the relationship in education, and it is that awareness, it is that interaction between people that will ultimately determine how successful we are in our Southern Hemisphere strategy of becoming closer partners between Australia and Latin America, and education is the best way to do it. And we're very proud to be able to support the program and the scholarship. I really want to wish John all the very best in getting some very exciting students through. We are very interested to meet the students. There is, of course, some self-interest here. We hope that one day that perhaps they'll be able to return to Latin America and work for us there, or some of them will be able to work for us here and use the experience they've got from ANU and their time through the scholarship with us. That's probably all I want to say tonight. Hopefully you'll enjoy Bernard's view of his time at Pac Hydro, and he's a wonderful chairman. He's been a great mentor for me, and he's a very worthwhile contribution he's going to make to this scholarship. Thank you very much.
Let me now introduce our keynote speaker of the evening, Professor Michael L'Estrange, the Director of the National Security College here at the ANU. Professor L'Estrange is well known to anyone in Australia acquainted with questions of public policy and especially national security, foreign policy, international relations. He was Secretary to Cabinet and Head of the Cabinet Policy Unit from 1996 until 2000, then Australia's High Commissioner to the UK. In 2005, he became Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, a position he held until August 2009. Professor L'Estrange was appointed Director of the National Security College here at the ANU in December 2009. Please welcome Professor L'Estrange.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, John, for the invitation, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here this evening and to say a few words on this significant occasion. It's great to be back among so many friends from the Diplomatic Corps and from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I always said publicly and privately that the group of Latin American ambassadors in my time as Secretary certainly achieved a momentum beyond their number. And unlike the former Vice-Chancellor, who John mentioned before, I always used to say that they acted very collegially. But maybe that reflects my diplomatic background. But look, it's great to be here. It is a significant occasion in many ways. It's significant because the scholarship that is being inaugurated this evening and which has been facilitated by Pacific Hydro is very important in its own right. It's important in terms of facilitating access for young Australian students to Latin America. It's important in terms of building on the high reputation of the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies here at the ANU. It's important in focusing the national interest of Australia onto an area of increasing significance in Latin America. And I hope it's also important in giving a lead to other corporate players in terms of supporting an initiative like this. It's also a very significant night because the scholarship that is being inaugurated pays very appropriate recognition to Bernard Wheelahan's enormous contribution to deepening the understanding between Australia and the countries of Latin America. I came to know Bernard in my time as a Secretary, but when I became Secretary in 2005, Bernard had already been in the post as Chairman of the Council on Latin American Relations since 2001. So was an old hand compared to me, and he also continued, of course, for a year or so beyond me into 2010. And in that period, Koala, as we all knew it, was extraordinarily vibrant in the energy that it brought to broadening the horizons of Australians about Latin America and in raising the profile of Latin America in Australia. And it did this through business, through culture, through technology, through tourism, through all kinds of people-to-people networks. Bernard himself brought to the role as chairman for the best part of a decade enormous drive, energy, enthusiasm, vision, and a relentlessness in a good cause. And he brought to it a lot of the best attributes of business, particularly in the resources and energy sector, but also, and particularly in later years, in the renewable energy sector. I always felt that whenever I met Bernard, you had to be sure of two things at least. One was to have very up-to-date briefing, because Bernard would always be up to date. And there's nothing worse than a secretary knowing less than the person he's meeting. The second thing was you had to be ready for and capable of responding to his shopping list of ideas and initiatives. And they were all directed at enhancing the understanding of Latin America, of building bridges and partnerships with Latin America, and in terms of broadening the horizons of Australians. And that's why I think this scholarship is so aptly bearing his name, because that is what drove his involvement in terms of private sector activity in Latin America, but also in terms of this very important dimension of public policy. And all of those aims are going to be advanced by this scholarship and by the work of the centre to which it is contributing. I think this is also a very significant occasion in a broader sense, in terms of the interaction between Australia and Latin America, which is becoming increasingly and mutually beneficial. And I think that's really happening at three levels. One is the bilateral synergies and complementarities, some of which we can see clearly, some of which the visionaries see. We've seen it particularly over the past decade or more in terms of the role of business in opening up interaction at a resources level: mining, oil, gas, renewables, agribusiness. We've seen it in many other aspects of the business relationship, including services. We've seen it in the way people vote with their feet, particularly students and education. And we're going to see it in the future more and more in relation to issues like climate change and renewable energy, food security, and many other aspects of public policy. So this bilateral synergy and connection is critically important. Business has led the way, and people have led the way, and in a certain sense, governments are catching up. I think that actually is in some ways a good sign, because the people are ahead of government. But the government is starting to catch up, and they need to catch up. The second level at which this interaction between Australia and Latin America is really becoming more important is simply the importance of Latin America in the world. Here's a region with more than 600 million people. It has 15% of the world's oil reserves. It has a hugely rich endowment of other energy resources. It has a quarter of the world's arable land, a third of the world's fresh water, a rapidly expanding middle class, enormous assets in terms of its human capital. This is, in every sense of the word, a dynamic part of the world. Of course, it faces challenges like every region. It faces challenges in relation to poverty alleviation, where it's already making important inroads with so much more to be done. It faces challenges in some countries in relation to law and justice. It faces other challenges in terms of technological, educational and other infrastructure. But make no mistake, the countries of Latin America are among the driving forces that are changing the balance of global influence. And countries like Australia need to recognise and adapt to those realities. And clever countries really need to anticipate them and anticipate the consequences of Latin America's role in this shifting balance of global influence. And that means understanding the dynamics of change and continuity in Latin America. Its dynamics, its colonial legacy, its indigenous traditions, the remarkable resourcefulness of its people, its engagement with the world, and its aspirations and ambitions generally. That's why Latin America is important for Australia, and it's why, in the long run, I hope that Australia will be important to Latin America. And the third level, I think, in which this interaction is increasing is simply because the countries of Latin America and Australia are working in the uncomfortable space between the limits of sovereignty and the constraints of multilateralism. We have a raft of transnational issues in the world today which countries acting on their own cannot address in the way they could have 20 or 30 years ago. At the same time, if they think that multilateralism alone is a solution, they're mistaken, because the pace of progress there can be glacial. So countries like Australia and those of Latin America are in this uncomfortable space, and they need to work together on issues where they have important common ground. And we have a lot of important common ground with the countries of Latin America in terms of effective global economic coordination, in terms of resource security issues, particularly energy, food and water, in terms of the global commons, free maritime and air space access, in relation to international criminal networks, in relation to public health issues, in relation to the changing dynamics of demography. In all of these areas, countries are wrestling between their lesser capacity to act in sovereign terms and the constraints of multilateralism. And it's the countries that can manage that space creatively and to their national benefit and their regional benefit, which are the countries that will go forward in the 21st century. I think in bilateral terms, Australia and the countries of Latin America have got a lot to do in this space together, because they both bring enormous shared assets to them and many shared perspectives. We can certainly do it in terms of regional organisations, such as APEC. We can do it in international organisations, such as the G20. But this is going to be the space in which I think there is a vital Australian interest in engaging with the countries of Latin America. So for all those reasons, I think this is a dynamic and forward-looking area of public policy. I think it's critically important to Australia to understand Latin America, to engage with it creatively, to build on the solid ground that business has laid, that education has laid, because in the long term, for the reasons I've said, this is going to be a vital national interest for this country. And I think in return, it will be a significant national interest for the countries of Latin America. So I'd like to again congratulate Pacific Hydro on its initiative here. I think it's ahead of its time, and I think it's been a wonderful incentive to many here who are committed to the pursuit of studying Latin America in all its dimensions, economic, social, cultural, political and others. I'd like to congratulate the Centre here and John in actually securing and advancing and implementing this initiative. And finally, can I say that in all of this, I am genuinely delighted that this new scholarship will bear the name of someone who has been a genuine trailblazer in this area, Bernard Wheelahan.
It's rare to go to an event about Latin America-Australia relations today without Bernard Wheelahan's name coming up. And that's because Bernard has made a very considerable career in Latin America and in building those relations with Australia. He spent his executive career with the Royal Dutch Shell Group and worked as president of Shell Venezuela from 1996 to 1999. He was chairman of Pacific Hydro, as we've heard, which has renewable energy projects in Chile and Brazil, and he was previously director of Normandy Mining, with gold mining and exploration interests in Brazil, Argentina, Chile and Peru. He was also the inaugural chairman of the Council on Australia-Latin America Relations from 2001 to 2010. And he's been involved in a great deal of public service, including at the moment Save the Children. Indeed, he once told me that he'd been on more than 50 boards, I think is correct, 50 or more than boards. Perhaps one of the least of these at the moment, one of the most important to us, is the board of the Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies. The worlds of academia and business often seem light years apart, but having Bernard as a business person on the board of ANCLAS has been an enormous advantage for us. He's never pushy to the director of ANCLAS, but he is always in touch. He always has suggestions, and he brings long, hands-on experience of business and government in both Australia and Latin America, and we're very proud tonight to give this scholarship his name. Please welcome Bernard Wheelahan.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I recall going many years ago to a wedding where the father of the bride happened to be a funeral director, and after the many speeches acknowledging his contributions to the event and the bride and the beauty of the bridesmaids, he got up and replied, and he said, "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I have been clothed in the epaulets of eulogy. Well, all I can say is I've been reclothed in the epaulets of eulogy, and I'm wondering what I can do for an encore, which I've debated at the table, and Rob Grant tells me all I need is for Hawthorn to win the grand final on the weekend. And that will have been achieved. I could only thank Rob and Michael and Eric for their very, very generous and kind words, and only say immediately that this should be called the Helen Wheelahan Scholarship, because our last 15 years, like Eric's first 15 years, have in fact been involved with Latin America since we chose together to go to Latin America, to the wonderful country of Venezuela and the wonderful city of Caracas, and to learn Spanish together, and it's an interest that we have shared for the last 15 years. I'm delighted to be the recipient of this scholarship. Who wouldn't be? Or the recipient of the naming of this scholarship, and I wish to thank in order the people whom I appreciate for that. The first is the Australian National University, Australia's preeminent university, which is in exactly the right place to take the initiative in Latin America relations. And indeed, that's exactly what it has done through Professor Minns and the ANCLAS organisation. In Koala, we were very, very concerned to achieve political, economic and social enhancement of our relationship with Latin America. Politically, I think we did well, mainly because of the support we had from DFAT and from the marvellous Secretariat represented by John Richardson here tonight and Libby Schick, who preceded him. The support and input that we had from DFAT really gave Koala the impetus that it needed and deserved. The political side was good, but as Michael remarked, if anything, business took the lead. Australian companies got into Latin America early. There isn't a better example than Pacific Hydro, but they got in and they took the initiative and recognised the opportunities and moved very assertively in that direction. So business and government, I thought, did relatively well. The bit of the equation that was always missing, in my view, was the rigorous and disciplined approach of academe to research and education and the provocation of thought about Latin America. There wasn't enough of it. There was too thin on the ground. It was too sociologically biased, if you'll forgive me, Tony. There was less insufficient hard economics, insufficient hard economic history, insufficient hard science in the relationship. But that has been picked up very, very directly and very assertively by the establishment of ANCLAS. Just about all of us here tonight, 2/3 of us at least, were at a wonderful dialogue on Australia-Latin America relations at the Melbourne University only last month. There were 200 people there. And a bit like this, it was a wonderful occasion. I mean, we all felt good about it when we arrived. We felt even better about it when we left, because we were really preaching to each other. We were preaching to the converted. I felt at the end of that it was a wonderful event, but where do we go from there? What do we do for an encore? And I can say exactly the same about this event tonight. I was here for the inauguration of ANCLAS, the undergraduate degree, a year ago. It was a wonderful occasion, and we've made wonderful progress since then. But there's an enormous opportunity for this university to seize the initiative and to genuinely take leadership about Australia's academic relations with this region. It needs a strategy and a policy for Latin America, led from the top, led from the Vice-Chancellor's office, supported by the university executive, supported by all of the deans, so that there is a clear and cohesive view about where this university wants to take Australia's academic relationships with Latin America. It's a wonderful opportunity. So I'd like to thank the university for taking this initiative. It's a first step on a very important journey. I'd then like to thank, as others have done, the Latin American ambassadors. There was nobody more enthusiastic than Pedro Villaga Delgado's predecessor, Mr. Nestor Stancanelli, for the formation of ANCLAS 10 years ago. It was a marginal activity in the university, but it always enjoyed his enthusiastic support as Dean of the Corps, as it now enjoys Pedro's support as Dean of the Corps, and with the collegiate support of the ambassadors. And one of the great advantages that this university enjoys is the support of all of the Latin ambassadors resident in this territory. So they've done a great job. John Gage, the most engaging and charming of gentlemen, who was the first director of ANCLAS, set the scene, but it has been taken up with enormous impact and enthusiasm by John since his appointment 3 years ago. And finally, I'd like to thank Pacific Hydro for having the generosity to name this particular scholarship at this particular institute after me. I'm immensely proud of the work that Pacific Hydro has done, as a renewable energy company, for all the reasons which Rob Grant spelt out. It is squeaky green, it is international, it's Australian owned, it's Melbourne based, it represents 5 million Australians. It's probably the most broadly held corporate entity in Australia, and it is pursuing ideals which are long-term and for the advantage of the planet, as well as for the advantage of all those Australian superannuants. I particularly am delighted to acknowledge the contribution which Rob Grant personally has made to the evolution of that company, through to and including his decision to immerse himself totally in Latin American culture by setting up his office and his administration in Sao Paulo in Brazil. There we go. It's a wonderful space to be in, ladies and gentlemen. We are all in this together. I've always said Australia is far too thin on the ground to have an impact in Latin American relationship unless we cooperate as Team Australia. Team Australia means business, obviously, it means government, and most importantly, and most recently, and most significantly here in this town, that means academically through the work of the Australian Centre for Latin American Studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you all for attending this evening. That concludes the formal part of the evening, but there's plenty of time still to stay and talk and enjoy music and the company. Thank you again.